We're joined here today by Palsson from Maritime Insight. Nice to have you here, Chris.
Thanks a lot, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Chris, you and I obviously go back a few years from our past career, but why don't you start things off by introducing the listeners to who you are, what you do, and then who it is that Maritime Insight support?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm managing director and partner of Maritime Insight, which is a maritime consultancy business. And I've had leading positions in maritime intelligence companies for over 3 decades now. Companies that I've worked for include Lloyd's List Intelligence, IHS Fairplay, Lloyd's Register Fairplay, and the Institute of Shipping Analysis in the past. And I'm also chairman of the International Maritime Statistics Forum, which is a meeting place for the sharing of best practices between managers from across the maritime cluster. What I and Maritime Insight do is to provide tailor-made consulting, analysis, and forecasts for a wide range of maritime issues. Key competence, though, is in the provision of what we like to think gold standard fleet and shipbuilding forecasts. I work closely with my clients to help them get a good understanding of where the markets are heading and why. And this is, among our clients, it's quite often top-level decision makers in all aspects, all corners of the maritime cluster. Clients are found among ships equipment manufacturers, classification societies, ports, governmental agencies, ship operators, and marine insurers. Are the most common, at least. So, yeah, that's who I am and what we do in a minute.
Good stuff. Appreciate the detailed introduction. Now, moving on then, Chris, to, I guess, the problem that you're solving on behalf of your customers. What is Maritime Insight trying to solve?
Our customers need to understand market trend shifts and how they ultimately impact on the demand for their services. Be that through the employment of ships and the need to invest in new capacity, or to look for retrofit solutions or any related services. Now, since there are so many moving parts in such an assessment, ranging from the impact of geopolitical actions to regulations for new fuels or what have we, all of this is interconnected, and it's quite challenging to get your head around what it ultimately means. But it impacts customers in different ways, since there are so many sub and niche markets in the maritime industry. So we are trying to help them to find those activities, those happenings that are most crucial to the future of their business. So who? Within industries, well, it's primarily the marketing and sales executives and those who are involved in strategic decision of all kinds, usually more for the longer term then. And that actually means that anyone within an organization who needs to adapt the company's activities to short and long-term changes in market demand. So that's what we're trying to solve, yes.
Understood. Who are the kind of typical individuals that Maritime Insight would serve them with fleet and shipbuilding forecasts? I understand you serve a wide range of customer types, as you mentioned in the introduction and just then, but are there any kind of particular personas that stand out?
Well, no, rather. It is the marketing and sales executives. So, for instance, companies that produce or distribute different equipment, maritime equipment, be that anything on the bridge of the ship, or main engines for propulsion, or whatever equipment that is related to the development of the fleet. In terms of upgrading, retrofit, or most oftenly investments in new ships. Mm-hmm. So if we tell them that we see an upturn coming in whichever market segment, vehicle, ro-ro, whatever, and they could immediately start to see, okay, that means seeing so and so many of our pieces of equipment for every new build.
How does an effective fleet forecast impact those sorts of individuals that you refer to?
Can I take a half a step back there and say that what they do get with these detailed fleet forecasts is both the knowledge behind and the analysis to why we see these changes. Second, what are the drivers for change and what should they be looking out for? Secondly, it is a package solution that they do get. It is quite often a brief report, data support, and face-to-face workshops where they can ask all the questions, and we can, so help them to understand what it actually means for them. That's what we do, and for them that means that they can then become better informed of the scope and range of the likely development of the demand for their services, and help them to better allocate their resources to meet with the anticipated changes in that demand.
And is that the importance then of kind of describing the why behind the what, right? Like, I appreciate, of course, your forecasts will often be boiled down into numbers, how many ships of a certain type are going to be delivered across what period of time. But is that the importance of the why then? Like, the likelihood of this happening relies on these particular scenarios playing out, or is it a different angle?
I think that you need to break that down into two pieces there. The why to the customer is, of course, first and foremost, why should we make these changes? Why should we be prepared for such a change in the market? But there is also the why. Why do we see these changes, arising? So there are two whys there, and one leads to the other. And in both cases, it adds to, shall we say, a preparedness or a readiness to act should our forecast be true or wrong, for that matter, heaven forbid. Rarely happens, if ever.
And I guess transparency must be particularly important with putting together any sort of decent forecast, right? Because I know Chris, for everyone listening to this, Chris and Nicholas and Maritime Insight put together a series of fantastic workshops called the Outlook Club, of which there are some fierce debates, for lack of a better term, over your kind of ideas behind why certain things will or won't play out. And I guess it gives people the flexibility to amend said forecasts based on the conviction of their own ideas, right?
Yeah. And I think you're putting a finger on a key issue of why this is valuable to the customer, because quite often the customer is, well versed, well into the data, into the drivers. They try to make their own forecasts. Some of the bigger companies have their entire departments doing pretty much the same thing as we do. But since it is such a complex analysis and approach needed, there is always something that you stand the risk of missing. So having these workshops, these interactive workshops where we can share and challenge and even help each other out. Even the smartest people on the planet, the best educated people on the planet need these. It's like a tennis game, you need to go back and forth a number of times with even the simplest issues to be certain that you actually have not missed anything that could be relevant.
Yeah, completely. And I guess perspective as well, right? Like, my experience of attending these workshops in the past is that it'll be full of anyone from ship owners and charterers to marine equipment manufacturers, class societies, people from governmental bodies, who each have a very particular perspective on what side of the market that they see, how their customers are reacting, how many orders of a particular product or service that they're receiving over a given point of time, that I guess will all add in as input to your overarching numbers, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I actually just come off the phone, or rather Teams as it is these days, with a customer that we have not had as a customer before, but they manufacture electric engines, and their business has been, hovering around the same level for years and decades. And suddenly, given the trend shift in the entire sourcing of energy of the planet, their services and their products, the demand for that has boomed. And suddenly they need all this support they can get to get their head around what should we focus on first, which low-hanging fruit, because to them, there are low-hanging fruit all around them, but what should we prepare for? What should we go for first? And what should we wait with until later on, So again, it gives you an idea that someone who has not been interested before suddenly sees, help me.
The best sort of customer.
Lovely. I like them.
Leading on from that then, Chris, to try and answer the all-important question of, well, how do you do it then?
This is an structured approach, to a large extent, a school book approach. If you've gone through, the motions of going through university, reading economics and all of that, you will find it the traditional, business environmental approach from Porter and everyone else. Bits and pieces of that, where you step your way through changes in the business environment, be that politics, geopolitics, regulations, environment, changes in the environment, the traditional macro analyses, the social and other changes that all have an impact on the conditions for doing business between countries and regions. That boils down ultimately to economic development and trade. And trade means demand for transport in almost all cases. So there you have it. So we all need to, keep a constant track of changes in these. The International Monetary Fund updated their forecast only yesterday and revised it down significantly for instance, Europe, for reasons that are no surprise to anyone really. But the magnitude of it is something that will impact each and every one, but in different ways. And then really, you structure the age profiles of the different fleets. It's very, very different from cruise to container to ferry and to crude oil tankers and or LNG gas tankers. It's completely different market structures and conditions that all lead to a different play out going forward. So it all needs to be addressed separately, but with the same business environmental context. So it's keeping track of many moving parts at the same time and try to, after a while, build up an understanding of, okay, so if it moves one step up in the right-hand corner, what does it mean on the left-hand corner? In some cases, nothing, but in the other corner, it could be, switching out to something significant. So it's a combined both quantitative and qualitative approach. It's mostly a qualitative approach with quantitative support.
Over the years that you guys have been doing this, what have you seen this result in for your customers?
Probably have to cherry pick a bit with anonymous customers here, but I mean, if we take super governmental organizations that look at us or turn to us and ask, for a, shall we say, white paper or strategy for the next 5 or 10 years in terms of maritime policies, that piece of work that we did for, I have one particular in mind, certainly guided them in understanding what the potential opportunities and risks for various parts of the maritime industry in that part of the world, what it really was, and also what they as a political organization or governmental agency actually could do to mitigate or prepare for any of these challenges that they saw that, and also to go after some of the benefits and opportunities that we highlighted for them, and we actually saw some of these coming to fruition, and that is of course very satisfying. In a few years down the line, that I had a little bit of influence on that development. You also see a number of ports. I mentioned ports as being a key segment for our efforts here, and we do help them. And to give you a bit of a context here, what a port needs to do is to be prepared for handling future volumes. It is a very, very long time in preparing to enhance, for instance, to receive ships that are longer or wider or require more draft. If you are to dredge your fairway, first of all, it's a piece of work that is costly and it takes time to do. And quite often, in most corners of the world, you need to go through the motions of environmental processes and all of that. So it usually is a 5 to 10 year process before you even start to enhance the capacity of that port. And then it should be valid for another 20 years. So they have a planning horizon of 30 years ahead. And in that process, they need to understand questions like, okay, should we expect, for instance, which has been the case, more general cargo to be containerized? So we should expand our capacity in just handling more cargo volumes in our container terminals, if we even have a container terminal. If they have one, okay, what size of vessels should we prepare for? Are we the likes of Singapore? So we always should be prepared for the latest generation, the biggest ships on the planet, and how big will they get, and will they expand in width or in length or in draft or in all dimensions? But even for a smaller port, or maybe even more important for a smaller port, going from a small 320 TEU feeder up to 1500 TEU is a massive investment and change in scope of business for them. And to help them out and then see that the port develops in such a way, and the volume builds up, and suddenly, it's very satisfying to see.
And finally, then, Chris, before we wrap up, what's next? Anything on the horizon?
There is always quite a lot on the horizon. A couple of things that springs to mind. First, in terms of activities, you mentioned these forecast workshops. We have one in about a month's time in Gothenburg. So if anyone is interested and that is still relevant to them, then fine. We have an annual event that is now running for I think it is the 33rd year in a row, called the Maritime Executive Meeting in January in Gothenburg. I'm happy to see more people joining up for that. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers. So those are on the activity side. In terms of products and services, we are looking at partnering with other companies in order to improve or build out the KPIs we see necessary for enabling our customers to follow up on the forecast that we have made on a more speedy feedback that you can get from AIS-derived vessel activities, for instance, or on trade demand changes. That usually is stuff that you get published once per year with 1 year's delay or lag, but monthly follow-up and those kind of activities to see, are we on the right track? Is the forecast pointing us in the right direction? Hopefully it is. And if so, time-wise, is it time to launch step B in the recommendations, etc.?
Very interesting then. So to summarize, Outlook Club in Gothenburg in November for anyone interested in the next 10, 20, 30 years of fleet development. The Maritime Executive Meeting, of which I've attended many a time and can certainly vouch for, a fantastic event in January, also in Gothenburg, as well as some interesting partnerships coming down the pipeline to turn some of your insights into real time or actionable. I don't know if I'm doing that justice exactly, Chris, but it sounds like there's some interesting stuff coming up. Well, Chris, thanks a lot for your time as always. We personally hope to be at that Maritime Executive meeting in January. So if anyone
You're
is
more than welcome. You're more than welcome.
Thank you very much. And I cannot believe you've not only comped the tickets, but the hotel rooms, which is great. Really appreciate it, Chris.
It's a really bad connection now. I cannot hear a word of what you're saying.
And on that bombshell, we'll let you go.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Cheers.